All right, everyone, I got to play the Battletech board game for the first time and almost coming up on 3 decades. It was a trip. Hello, everybody. My name is Preston Poulter. Welcome to Lords of Iron. I wanted to take you through it. All right, so this was at the North Texas Role Playing Game Convention here in Dallas, which is a gathering dedicated to the old school Osric kind of like 70s and 80s first, second edition in D&D and variations thereof. And so, as you can imagine, the Battletech players were very much like, the equipment sheet was exactly how I remember. There was no new tech, there were no extended range anything. The mechs were all essentially unseen. I got to play the Crusader. Now, mine was a variation. It had LRM 10s, but it didn't have the ammo bins, the little waiting death traps in the left and right torso, which I appreciate. The Crusader was a lot of fun to play. It's weird the way they statted out everything on the arms. That meant I couldn't punch. Like the natural thing to want to do with a Crusader is get close and like punch and kick somebody, but the medium lasers are in the arms and the SRMs are in the legs, and they're like. Other than that, look, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, so I thought I'd take you through like a turn by turn. Now, this is a con game. Some of these players had never played before. The tactics were all over the place. Like starting, we were using the old school Battletech maps, and we had 4 of them all laid out. And the archer puts himself on my side, puts himself right behind a big hill, and I'm like, why? And I mentioned to him, like, why are you doing that? Like, do you intend to climb up and, are you going to assume a position on that big hill and then just shoot LRMs at people? Like, no. I, as team captain, elected him to make the first move, and his first move was spent walking around the hill, where he could have just started. Whatever. Okay, it's a con game, life is moving on. So the lances were very old school. Basically, symmetry. Each lance had 1 marauder, 1 crusader, 1 archer, 1 warhammer, and then we had like a couple of we had a little variation. Our lance had like a panther and a dervish, and their lance had I don't even remember. No, their lance had a dervish too. It was very symmetrical. So you can see here we are at the end of turn 1, and again our lance is kind of advancing down the field, except for the archer, who for whatever reason started behind the hill, and he was way in the back. I mean, it's okay that you have an archer way in the back, but still, I just kept thinking to myself, why did you do that? Oh, wow. All right, so in the second round, and here's where, I feel like the whole tactics of tabletop Battletech have less variety than other tabletop games, which I'll get into later, but it's all about trying to get it so you can focus fire on one mech and they can't really focus fire on you. So try and maneuver them to where one enemy unit kind of stands present that everyone can shoot at, and they can't do the same thing to you. That way you can neutralize your opponents as quickly as possible. And so I'm looking at this, and the terrain, it's these old-time Battletech maps, and you got the big lake in the middle, and their lance is kind of splitting around the lake. And I'm like telling, because if you look there on the left side of ours, we have a marauder. And I'm telling a marauder, like, why don't you cut over here? And we'll all go and engage the middle as one big unit. And then their forces over there will take a turn or two to kind of maneuver into us, and we'll have an advantage. The marauder pilot was having none of it. He was full speed ahead. Like, all right, well, wasted tactics. So here's where we ended up around 2. So as you can see, we basically have split into 2 forces and 2 forces on either side. All right, end of turn 3. Now we're starting to exchange some fire. And here's where I got to say the opposing marauder pilot, you can already tell at this point that the opposing marauder is going down. Like, he is the front they've formed into kind of a U, and the edge of the U is right there in the center of the map, and it's something we can all shoot at. Now, they can all kind of shoot at us. It's not perfect, but still, we all started shooting at that marauder, and that marauder was starting to take hits. And then next turn, we have kind of a mass melee. My Crusaders in there mixing it up with their marauder. Our Warhammers and their Warhammers, and archers are just kind of over there on the left side. Meanwhile, we've got our medium mechs there in the middle, firing at the marauder. That marauder's going to be hurting pretty soon. One more turn of kind of mass melee combat, because one more turn of just kind of mass melee and firing at each other combat, because let's face it, Battletech, it takes a long time. It's not like modern warfare where a thing gets hit with a round, like a ship gets hit with a missile and the ship is now sinking. In Battletech, missile, laser, whatever, like, until it shoots through the armor, you're pretty much golden, and that takes a while. Reminds me of how tough the Battletech fighters were. Hey, info card to check out the video where I'm talking about the Battletech just smashing through 5 buildings and just standing up and being like, what? Our line starts to kind of come towards the middle, except for one Warhammer that ends up off engaging the other Warhammer and a Crusader, which didn't seem like a particularly sound plan to me, but whatever. I'm just team captain. Nobody listens to me. The Marauder got brought down by a mighty kick of mine, and from that point forward, it was pretty much stuck in that spot. But our Marauder also took a fair amount of hits from their team. Essentially, the Marauders on both teams ended up being the casualties at the end of the day. So then next turn, their Marauder makes a valiant effort to stand up, which it did, but we kind of have it surrounded. Other mechs, the Hatchet Man is coming in to support, but it's too late. Meanwhile, I got kicked by the Marauder, and that was really the only significant damage I had taken. But kicks hurt, and apparently they're very easy. In the new rules, I was told it's piloting -2, and our piloting was 5, so you hit on a 3, and you ignore movement. Like, you're always going to hit with a kick, and a kick's going to hit for a lot. Maybe we should try kicking. That's where it's a shame that the Crusader has all of its missiles in the legs. And this was about the point where I was like, all right, folks, I'm going to leave the game because it takes so long. That was one of the things going back to Battletech. I'm like, oh my God, you got to roll for each weapon system. If it happens to be a missile system, then how many missiles hit? If it's a short-range missile system, well, then you got to roll each location on these things. And the guy who was running the game was a smoker. So between each round, it was time for a 5-minute break for cigarettes. The game was dragging a bit. Look, and I'm not throwing stones here. I understand the need for things. I get it. But I chose to turn it in because I wanted to get back and start selling more of my comic books the next day. But I was told that we more or less won because they took out our Marauder. We took out their Marauder and Hatchet Man by the time it was all said and done. So there you go. That was kind of my run through on my con experience. It was pretty wild and crazy. Not much discipline on either side. This has been Preston Poulter with Lords of Iron. Thank you very much for your time.